Good morning. Bob Michaelson here in Southwest Florida. I'd like to speak today about an economics topic regarding inflation. And this has been in the news quite a lot recently, but I would like to focus on one cabinet leader who was a professor at my alma mater and talk about Professor Janet Yellen and inflation. I have a lot of respect for economics professors as well as finance professors, all related topics that they really know how to crunch numbers. They know the theory behind economics and finance. They know the theory backwards and forwards, and they also know how to do high-level mathematics. For example, in econometrics, there's calculus used. So they're very impressive people. And the thing that I'm concerned about, the thing that bothers me is when they take political views more than economic views. And I think that's what's going on here with Professor Yellen. She's said that she's claimed that inflation will go down in the middle of 2022. I don't know how anyone could claim that with a chance of another 1.5 trillion to 3.5 trillion in spending on the table that the House passed today on November 19th, 2021. And only the Senate stands between kind of a disaster, I think, for a lot of reasons, but mainly sticking to a discussion of inflation today. There was another professor during the Obama administration who was on the Council of Economic Advisors named Austin Goulsbee. The reason I know about him is because he was on Fox News quite a bit, as well as other news shows, not quite as good as the Fox News shows. But anyway, he was very outspoken about deficits will be no problem. It's okay to have a 800 billion stimulus with, it turns out, no shovel-ready projects that became a sort of a joke at one point to our former president and to the former head of General Electric, who got a big kick out of it when discussing it. Sad but true. You can look it up. The former head of General Electric, Jeffrey Immelt. So I was concerned to hear, and I never had Professor Yellen as a professor because I wasn't in business school, but I had economics classes in micro, macro, international economics. So I have some background in that field. So I looked on the Cal website, or I just did a general search for Professor Yellen's background. And on the Cal Berkeley website, the Haas School of Business, where she also taught besides economics department, she lists her interests, or the writer lists her interests and specialties as unemployment and labor markets and monetary and fiscal policy. So we know she has some expertise in that area, which is a little more, it makes it more disturbing. She has a great bio. She's a former chair of the Federal Reserve. Now she's the Treasury Secretary. So she moved from one very, very important position to another very important position in this administration. Also, besides knowing how to crunch the numbers, which would tell them that the money supply will be overflowing if this other spending goes through, they know the history of inflation in Germany in the early 1930s and the United States in the late 70s, early 80s, that it was hard to get rid of it. It was incredibly difficult. President Ford, when he was in office, starting in 1974, put through the WIN program, whip inflation now, and there are buttons people could wear on their lapel with a WIN button, and then part of it is a psychological problem. If there's expectation that prices will go up, that's part of the problem. wages and prices go up. And under President Nixon, there were wage and price controls put in for a time. So even Republican presidents have struggled with inflation and fought against it because it creates all kinds of havoc. Interest rates went way up in the late 70s, so everyone was paying more for mortgages, for car loans, any kind of borrowing. And consumers, as we see right now, consumers in grocery stores, at gas stations, really get hurt, and including our friends with a lower income get hurt very much. It's like a tax, as is commonly said. So this is not especially a partisan issue, except President Biden is taking some very strong criticism for this. But one leading Democrat economist named Larry Summers, formerly the president of Harvard University, as well as an economics professor, warned about 6 months ago, or 7 months ago, that inflation was, there was a high risk that inflation was going to get very high with the first $1 trillion that went out the door in this administration. And he knows how to lay out his objections a lot clearer than I do. And then under President Trump, Hassett did a good job as a budget director, chief economist. And although actually deficits were too high under President Trump also, but nothing like they are right now. And a lot of conservatives said the deficits were too high under George W. Bush, under Trump. So we do say it, but it doesn't tend to get as much attention when it's not a crisis situation. We often say it. And it's hard to choose what the priorities should be in a budget. And economics is partly defined as the study of scarce resources. One scarce resource is money for the budget. Now, regarding Professor Yellen, I don't want to say she lied, but she certainly equivocated. She's disingenuous. If I say she lied, I might get kicked out of the Cal Alumni Association. I get banned. And if I write a letter to the editor of the alumni magazine, it won't get in there. I certainly am not going to write about this topic, but I have written before and it got in there. So I don't want to lose that privilege. Also, by the way, tomorrow there's a big game in the Bay Area, Cal versus Stanford. Tune into that if you can. So the last couple of points I want to make. I'm not 100% sure that inflation is going to increase to double-digit levels in the next year and a half. But I am sure it's not just going to fix itself or go away very quickly. It jumped to over 6% in about 6 months. So it's pretty obvious if we throw another $1 to $3 trillion into our money supply, it will stoke the fire. I do have a suggested solution, and that is that we do some national stress tests. We've all heard of stress tests in the last 10, 12 years after the troubles in the mortgage crisis started in 2008. Dodd-Frank bill and now the law requires that larger banks do stress tests. I believe it's every year. They could also have stress tests for national economies, which we need in the U.S. When changing a bunch of variables at the same time, as I said in an earlier podcast, when changing a bunch of variables at the same time, it's pretty risky and it's very hard to track what's working and what is not working. For example, if regulations are changed, dramatic changes to regulations, and also tax rates are changed drastically, especially when they're raised to take money out of the economy, out of the real economy, and put it in the government side of the economy, that's a problem. It's a risk, and it's very hard to track. So that is my main argument for this podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll sign off now.